Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this wire crochet peace sign, and it'll be really cute both as a necklace, earrings or anything else you can think of. And these will also be available for sale in my shop along with other jewelry tutorials and kits. There'll be a link to it in the description box down below. Otherwise, if you want to learn how you can make one for yourself, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now first of all, the wire that I'm using is a regular round silver coated copper wire, and the gauge is a 0.4mm. And the beads I'm going to be adding are these 3mm preciosa bicone beads. Of course you can use whatever kind of beads you prefer or leave them out completely. And then of course we need our findings as well. So I've got my Lost or Claw clasp and extended chain and a few jump rings. And because I'm making this into a necklace, I've also got my chain. As for the tools, I've got some flush cutters so we can cut our wire, some chain nose and some tweezing nose pliers to manipulate our wire, and also for the jump rings. And of course most importantly we need our crochet hook. So the one I'm using here is a 1.25mm hook. It doesn't have to be that specific size, just make sure it's a small one. And like usual, you'll find the material list and useful links in the description box below the video. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. So as for the wire, I'm going to be working with it still attached to the reel because one, it's hard to know how much we're going to use, and also that way there's minimal wastage. But I'm going to start towards one end of it here. So just make sure to leave a short little tail and then put the wire over my finger like this. Then grab my crochet hook and then put the hook in between my finger and the wire. And I'm just going to then do one full rotation with the hook like that, because then that creates our very first loop, and then from there we can start our actual crochet. So this is the long length that's still attached to the reel that we're going to be working with, and I just have the tail. I can hold on to that in the beginning. It's a little bit fiddly to hold on to, but once we have a couple of loops made it gets easier. So this length of wire is coming behind the loop, so make sure the crochet hook is through the loop and then grab onto the wire to pull it through the loop towards the front, and then I'm going to push the hook through to the widest part there, the part of the shaft just before the handle, and then pull it out a bit further like that. Now we need to flatten it to lay next to the first loop that we made. So I'm going to rotate the crochet hook, the hook part there, so it's facing away from me, and then flatten it to sit right next to the other loop. So you can see we now have two loops right next to each other, and if you look from the side, they are flat as well. And I'm going to make a row of loops just like this. So I have two right now, and then now we can hold on to that first loop that we made. So just put the hook through, pull the wire from the back towards the front there through the loop, push the hook through so we enlarge the loop and pull it out a bit further, and then rotate the hook away from you and then flatten it down. And now I have three loops there. So like I said, we need to make a row of loops like this. And every time as well that I make a new loop, I keep moving my fingers up to hold onto the piece right underneath where my hook is. That way you have most control. Just pull the wire through, create a new loop and flatten it down. And then make another loop here. This is going to be my 11th one. So flatten that down, and I have a row of 11 loops. So from here we need to now work our way back up. This is going to be, you could call it the spine in the middle. So from there, put your crochet hook through, pull the loop through just like this, but instead of now continuing the row in that same direction, we need to actually go back upwards, so the path that we've already done. So I'm just going to make sure my hook is through that loop, and then I'm going to bring the hook backwards, and while I'm through that loop we just made, I'm going to also put it through the previous loop, so that when I push it all the way through and then pull this wire tight around the hook, I've now basically gone back a loop, and we actually have two loops around the crochet hook. And then from there we can kind of just maneuver a piece around however we need to hold it best. We need to then bring the wire through, create another loop. So again, push the crochet hook to enlarge it and then pull it out a bit further, and I'm going to work my way back up. So I'm just going to go through that very next loop, making sure I'm still through the loop we just made. So we again have the two loops around the hook, and make sure every time we now go through a loop like this to just pull on that wire so it tightens around the actual hook. That way we also get a more even result. So bring a new loop out, working our way back up one loop at a time, and we just need to count where we are as well. So from the very bottom there, 1, 2, 3, this is going to be the fourth one. bring through, pull it tight, and then pull out a new loop, and the 5th one, repeat, pull the new loop, and the 6th one, go through, pull it tight, and now we are basically in the middle of this row that we made. So I actually have 5 loops on either side, you can count them there, which means I now need to change direction. So I'm just going to change how I'm holding it again. I'm going to take the very tail where the beginning point is. I'm having that point away from me. And this bottom part here that we just went back over is basically going to be that little leg in the middle on the bottom. Now we need to make the other legs as well. So I'm bringing the wire through, creating a new loop. And I'm now going to bring this loop here out to the side when I flatten it down. So it's going out towards the left. Looks a little something like that, but it's still flat next to the others. And now we need to make a row coming out from here. And we need the same amount of loops. So from the midpoint, including that one, I need 5 loops. So we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again from there, that is the outer one. So I'm pulling through a new loop. And then I need to come back up the same path that we just made. So go back 1 loop while we're still through that new one. So again, we're doubling up the loops and pulling that wire tight. Remember to do that. And then work your way back up, basically into that midpoint. So go through the next loop, pull the wire through, create the last loop here, and go back into that midpoint, and again go through those loops. And you can see we now have 2 separate legs kind of coming out from that midpoint, and they both have doubled up loops on top of each other. Then from here, pull the wire through to create a new loop, because we still need to just make the 3rd leg on the other side. So you just bring this loop out to that side like that. Again, lay that flat next to the others, and from there we just need to make the same amount of loops as we did for the other legs. So including the connection point there, that's 1, 2, and then 3, 4, and 5. So you can start to see the effect that we're going to get there. But for this one, we just need to go back up and basically reinforce this. So create that new loop, go back through the previous loop. So we're doubling them up again. And just work your way back up into that midpoint, 1 loop at a time, and then pulling a loop through and going through that midpoint. So where all these legs, you could call them, are connected to. Make sure to pull the wire tight. And now all that's left in the middle here is go back up through the last row that hasn't been doubled up. So that was the very first few loops that we actually made. So just pull a new loop through, and you then just want to change direction and go upwards through there 1 loop at a time, until we make it all the way back up to the very first loop where we have that initial tail coming up from as well. And then you can see we basically have the mid part of the peace sign. Now what we need to do is just create this circle going all the way around. And we're going to do that from here. So from this very last loop that we doubled up, bring a new loop through. And now I'm going to go again out to the left side. So straight out to the side. And we now need to start creating that circle, and along the way connecting to those ends of the legs as well. So just keep making loops here until we get to the very first little leg. And I've ended up making 13 loops here, including the very first one where it started coming from. So this is then going to have that curved part to the circle. And on the 13th loop here, I'm going to make sure the hook is through that loop, and then also put it through the outer loop on the first leg that we run into, and then pull that nice and tight. And then just to connect the 2 together, pull a new loop through, and then basically continue this circle row that we're making, and then reach to the next outer loop there in the next leg. So I'm making my 5th loop after the previous connection point, so not including that, and then counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this loop here, I'm making sure I'm through that, go through the next leg, the outer loop here, pull the wire nice and tight, connect that by pulling the wire through and making a new loop, and continue. Now we need to reach that next leg, and that is just going to be the same amount of loops as previous, so we basically need 4 loops in between each of the legs, and 4, and then we need the 5th one to be the one that connects to the leg, so 5, and then bring through that next outer loop in the leg, and now basically just need to complete and come back up to the top. So make a new loop to connect them, and that is going to be the same amount of loops as we did in the first section over here. So that's 13, including that connection point we're coming from. So that's 1, 2, and 13 here with the last one. And then from that, I'm going to go through the very first loop again, so where we started making the circle, and you can just pull the wire through to connect them. And you can see we kind of have it connected all the way around. Now this doesn't exactly look like a circle, but don't worry too much about that now, because what we're going to do is go back over this one more time, and it's going to help neaten it all up and make this shape nicer as well. So I'm just going to take this loop we just pulled out, go straight through the next loop. So the very first one at the beginning of the circle here. And then every time now I want to make sure to again pull this wire tight, because that's going to make the loops more uniform and also help sort out the shape more. So just do one loop at a time, work your way all the way back around until we're back at the beginning again. So now I've got all the way back up to the top here, and I just pull the loop out a bit for now, and you can see it's neatened up much more. Now if you find that it's still a little bit wonky, you can always go in and also help manipulate it yourself. Just kind of push some loops together if you need to until you're happy with it. But then from here, what I'm going to do is cut off this length of wire. So if you want to add beads, then you need to make sure to leave a bit of a tail. So I'm going to leave about 20 to 30 centimeters or so. Obviously, if you don't want to add beads, you can just cut it off shorter. But then from here, I'm going to then go back through the loop with my hook and literally pull the wire all the way through. So it's now coming out through that final loop that we made, and then we can use this length to add our beads. Now of course you can add your beads however you want to. I'm just going to be going around the outside circle and adding beads. You can also add them in the middle, that's up to you. But then what I'm going to do is take the very end of the wire, and I'm going to go down through the loop that's next to the one where it's coming out from, and I'm just going to make sure to go kind of in between some of the wires in the crochet here. So pull it all the way down. That also just tightens up that very last loop that we made because it's a little bit loose, but let's tighten now. And then come up through the same loop, but on the other side of some wires, so it doesn't pull straight back out. And then I have my wire here coming out of the front, and we're ready to start adding in our beads. So I'm just going to grab one, add it onto the end of the wire, let it drop all the way down, and then what I'm going to be doing is adding a bead on every other loop. So I'm coming out from the first loop, and then want to skip a loop, which is where the bead is going to sit, and then I want to go down through the loop after that. So remember, I'm skipping the loop where the bead is going to sit, come down through, and then as you're pulling it, just make sure that the bead is going to end up sitting sideways on top of that loop. And pull that nice and tight, come up through the same loop that we went down through, but on the other side of some wires. Pull that all the way through, grab another bead, add it to your wire, let it drop all the way down, skip the next loop and go down through the one after that, and then make sure that bead sits sideways, and then come up through the loop again. So we're basically kind of stitching in and out of the loops here while adding the beads in. And I'm just adding them to the front here. And I'm literally just going to keep going all the way around the circle and adding them in this exact way. Once you've added your beads, then all that's left to do is finish off the ends here. So what you want to do is just get to the back where the ends are coming out and just find a place in the wire crochet where you can wrap these ends around a couple of times. So a single wire. So just bring it through and then pull it so it coils around, and do that in the same place a couple of times to make it nice and secure. And then you can just bring the wire around as if you're going to wrap it again, but instead of doing that, you need to cut off the excess. So cut off the wire. So there's just a short little tail left. You can feel that with your finger. And then take your Tweezernose and just go in and squeeze that down so it gets tucked in among the wire crochet, so all the wires here, and gets put out of the way. And then of course just repeat the same with the other end as well. And then all that's left to do is add a jump ring here, so we can add either a chain or if you want to add it to earring findings. So get your jump ring, and of course we just need to open it up first, like that. And then we need to put it through at the very top here. So in my case here, I have a bead on top of that loop, but what we just want to do is slip the jump ring in behind that and basically bring it through the loop in the wire crochet that's naturally there. So slip it through, and I'm just going to add my chain, and then we can close it back up, and then we have it attached to our chain. And of course I just need to also add my findings on the ends. You can add whatever you like, and then here you have your finished peace sign necklace. So I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial for this wire crochet design, and like I said, you can use it for necklace, earrings, or anything else you can think of. And make sure to check out my channel for loads more tutorials within many different mediums. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.